Just about to say. Wonderful. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the August ACT-IAC Acquisition Community of Interest panel on post-solicitation best practices. Here's a quick agenda for this afternoon's session. Welcome, everybody. We'll kick off with some acquisition community of interest news. If you love this session, if you're looking to get more involved with the acquisition community of interest, we have some opportunities and some information to share with everybody. And then we'll jump into panelist introductions and have, of course, the bulk of our session today, a discussion with our panelists on post-solicitation best practices. We will have some time at the end of the session for additional Q&A from the audience, but if you do have questions throughout, please feel free to use the chat feature and we can ask your questions to the panelists at the end of the session, or if it makes sense to ask during a particular topic, we can also incorporate your questions then. All right, and with that, a big leadership team here. Our acquisition community of interest is led by our government chair, Scott Simpson. Scott is a member of DHS's Procurement Innovation Lab. We also have Mike Scorney, who'll be joining us as government vice chair from FEDSA. Terrell Russell is our programs chair from JPI. He helps make all these events happen for us. Ben Marklin is our industry chair from Centennial Technologies. Nicole Santero, that's me, industry vice chair from Booz Allen Hamilton. Emily Scantlebury is our vice programs chair. Loren McKenzie, our communications chair, and Sandy Barsky and Julie Dixon serving as our advisors to give us their wealth of knowledge on government procurement. A few opportunities to get involved with the community of interest. First, if you didn't know, we had a part one of this that was focused on pre-solicitation. So all of the market research and all the activities that go on prior to solicitation drop. We covered some best practices on the government and industry side. At the beginning of the year, we had a panel on that, and we put out a white paper. So if you haven't seen that white paper, check it out. These slides will be available to everybody after the session, and you can find the link there to read the white paper. We will have a corresponding white paper that comes out of this session on post-solicitation best practices. So from what we hear today from our panelists and from our volunteers who want to help develop that post-solicitation best practices white paper, please reach out to the acquisition COI@gmail.com. If you would like to contribute to that white paper, we'll set up a kickoff meeting later this month. And last but not least, if you don't want to write a white paper, that's okay. We'd still love to have you be a volunteer with the COI. You can lead a project. You can give us ideas for future events, speakers, etc. So please reach out to the Acquisition COI if you'd like to get involved, and follow us on LinkedIn, where we post event information and also articles relevant to federal procurement. Last slide from me. One of our roles as the acquisition community of interest is supporting this government industry group, acquisition working group. And they are looking for volunteers also, particularly government contractors or program staff with knowledge of acquisition processes. And they have 3 different work streams where they're looking for volunteers. One is this SBOM FAQ that they're putting together, kind of myth busters about the software bill of materials guidance and what's going on there. The second one is kind of a compilation of vendor vetting guidance. And then the third one is again, information around navigating SCREM compliance. There's a couple pending FAR rules that they're looking at. And again, all of these just giving more information to the acquisition community. If you'd like to get involved with any of these work streams, you can email the acquisition COI or this COI@actiac.org address. All right, I think I've done enough talking at you all for the afternoon, and I'll pass it over to Terrell now to introduce our panelists.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Nicole. Hello, can you hear me? All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Nicole. I appreciate it. So we're very excited to talk with y'all today about post-solicitation best practices. We brought in a group of experts, both from the government and industry, to share their knowledge with the group. I'll start just top left down to bottom right. So Karim, do you want to introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Terrell. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. My name is Karim Fadel. I'm currently running business development for a portfolio of accounts in CGI Federal. I've been in the industry for about 20 years in a number of roles, from prop development, prop management to capture to BD. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you very much. Glad to have you. Next, we have Jennifer Johnson.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Johnson. I am the Executive Director for Acquisition Policy, Legislation Oversight and Workforce, which is a long title at HHS. I'm actually relatively new to HHS, but have been in the government contracting field for about 17 years. Most of my federal career was at the Department of Transportation. And prior to that, I worked for a small 8A vendor, actually, in their contracting office. So nice to see everybody today.
Thank you. Glad to have you, Jennifer. Moving over to Patty Hoover.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patty Hoover. I'm the Chief of the Policy and Quality Control Branch within the Office of the Chief Component Procurement Officer within FEMA, which is a component of DHS. I've been in this role probably for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was a supervisory contract specialist with FEMA, overseeing the IT and support services buy. And then I've had other government agency experience as well. I've had about 32 years in government procurement. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Moving down, we have Gissa Sateri.
Good morning. No, it's good afternoon. Just the time just changed. Gissa Sateri with ACT Associates. I lead business development and growth for our environment natural resources portfolio here at ACT. Like my counterpart Karim, I've been in the federal contracting kind of industry sector for about 20 plus years, more than I like to think, and in a variety of roles, ranging from growth to program management.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gissa. Moving over, we have Dominic Sale.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dominic Sale. I am at REI Systems. I'm a vice president on our growth team. I have recently left government. Well, it feels recently, but it's almost 2 years next month, after a 14-year career at Department of Transportation, OMB, and GSA. So I am neither an acquisition I'm not going to be an acquisition expert, nor on either side, but I'll hopefully know enough today to represent kind of a viewpoint of a buyer and a seller. I want to close by saying thank you to our acquisition professionals from government who are on this in perhaps the busiest, I don't know if it's the busiest week, but I know it's the silly season, and I really appreciate that you all were able to make it and join us today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Great point, Dominic. Thank you. Moving down or over, we have Spenser Sams.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Spenser Sams. I'm the chief of the portfolio management section at FEMA's Office of the Chief Component Procurement Officer, along with Patty Hoover. Our team works a lot with the program offices throughout the FEMA organizations on their acquisition strategies, acquisition planning, and really helping them develop clear and concise requirements documents. So we help out a lot with the pre-solicitation phases, but we also are engaged in a lot of the innovative techniques employed during evaluations, and different methodologies that are promoted by DHS Procurement Innovation Lab. So thank you very much and appreciate you having us on the panel today. Yes, sir. Thank you. And rounding us out on our panelist is John Dobriansky. I'm sorry, John, if I butchered that, from the Department of Defense. Hello, John.
Hello, thank you, Terrell. Yeah, this is John Dobriansky. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to be on this excellent panel. Was also a contributor to the pre-solicitation practices white paper that just came out. My background, Director Contracts and Acquisition with the Department of Defense, leadership and $100 million plus source selections, best value trade-off, also an acquisition innovator, other transaction authority, mid-tier 804 and other innovative acquisition authorities and practices. Also a background, a civilian agency, Department of Transportation and others, leader, longtime contracting officer, and have also worked with GSA FAR staff and defense pricing and contracting. So again, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel and look forward to having a fun and engaging session.
Thank you, John. We've had a couple of run-ups to this, and every conversation I've left knowing more than whenever I went in. So that is the goal for everybody who's listening today. The group of folks who are panelists just really know their stuff. So I'm very excited to hear from them. Before we go into our first set of questions, our other moderator from the government side is Scott Simpson. He is our government chair for the COI. But do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Scott Simpson. I'm the digital transformation lead with the DHS Procurement Innovation Lab. I've been with the lab for about 4 years, and prior to that, I had about 10 plus years in operational contracting with DHS and its various components. And I'm really happy to have all of you here today, especially our panelists.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And I'm Terrell Russell. I'm the COI programs chair. I am a senior manager with JPI, and we are focused on, my focus is on our GSA account. We support category management initiatives, public building services, and federal acquisition services there. This is something that I'm near and dear to my heart. I started out as a contracting officer in the Air Force and have been acquisition program manager for years. So I'm very excited to hear from these folks and talk about the various post-solicitation, from solicitation drop through award best practices. So as a heads up, what we'll be covering today are topics such as solicitation release notifications, the question and answers process, how extensions are granted, and the process into getting those out to industry partners, the technical evaluation board construction and the evaluation process. Then we're going to talk a little bit about award notifications, unsuccessful offer notifications, and debriefings. And then we will wrap up with a couple of closing remarks and a call to action. So with that, I am going to ping pong it over to you, Scott, for the first question on solicitation release notifications.
Yeah, so we want to give a bit of, peek behind the curtains, if you will, about what happens in between, when the RFI is released and when the solicitation is finally released. And so we want to ask some of our government folks, maybe Patty or Spenser, to explain to us how that acquisition strategy is finalized. Like, walk us through what happens in between when you've received your RFI responses and all that stuff that goes on in the background until when the solicitation pops out again. I don't know who wants to start off.
I can go ahead.
Go ahead, Patty.
I can go ahead and start. Sure. So the very beginning of the process, even prior to when a request for information is issued, is, of course, our acquisition planning, which we try to do better and better at in government, specifically in FEMA. We've been doing more to actually promote acquisition planning with our customers. So that market research that we get from our customers is key in developing our potential strategies and also our potential questions that would go into some kind of a request for information or sources sought. So our program offices, in conjunction with our contract specialists, look at a whole host of things. They look at current contract vehicles. Here in DHS FEMA, we're actually required to look at best-in-class vehicles first, which are our DHS specific vehicles or best-in-class vehicles issued by other agencies, specifically the GWACs that you guys are probably familiar with, the government-wide acquisition vehicles. So we look at that, we look at the complexity of the procurement, and then of course defining that performance work statement is key too. Based on all of that, if we see gaps in information that we need to be able to actually put together a good requirement and evaluation, that's when you see agencies issue requests for information or even sources sought. If we're trying to, for example, set something aside for small business and we would like to see the small business community that potentially could do the requirement. So once that's done, and or sometimes you may see a draft request for proposal issued as well. Once that's done and we actually get back the responses, that's when we are hopefully able to really firm up that requirement. So that's just kind of a really quick basic strategy that we'll see used. And Spenser, I know Spenser of FEMA, as you mentioned, he works very closely with our program offices. So his group is instrumental in making that happen.
Yeah, Spenser, maybe you can give like an operational viewpoint, because I know you work really closely with the teams. For you, what does it look like getting everything approved back there behind the scenes between, you know, finalizing the market research and your solicitation release?
Yeah, no, thank you, Scott and Patty. Building off what Patty was saying, I mean, really, she brought up two things that are critically important, and it's the DHS strategic sourcing vehicles and our small business concerns. So going out with the RFIs, going out with the sources sought notices, those really help us better gauge industry's capability and capacity to perform what our needs are with our requirements. So through those RFIs and evaluating the responses that have come in, we're better prepared to make the decision when it comes to the acquisition strategy, as in, okay, we're going to set aside for small business, we're going to utilize DHS strategic sourcing vehicles, or you know what, really we're finding that we have to go out full and open. So that input and that engagement with the industry really does help us figure out the best procurement strategy to fulfill our needs. As far as behind the scenes, the input and engagement from industry at this stage is critical. I mean, we can't, especially early on in the process, we can't get enough market research, and that insight, that involvement from industry, providing us with that information on which path would lead us to the best solution is critical for this, for determining the best procurement strategy.
Yeah. John, as the director of contracts, what are you looking for when you're reviewing these acquisition strategies before you let them release the solicitation?
So an articulate acquisition strategy document. So typically, you know, over $25 million for systems, and then other, you know, commercial over $10 million, there's a codified acquisition plan. And it's a joint program office and contracting office effort. And I want to emphasize that because that's critically important. In the acquisition plan, you're not only taking a look at requirements, you're also taking a look at financials, contract type, beginning of an independent government, IGCE, independent government cost estimates, and also milestone schedules, you know, for whether that encompass, you know, solicitation package, completion, release, source selection time, and then, you know, award and then post-award administration. One point that I want to emphasize is acquisition success So acquisition success, meeting milestones and getting within cost, schedule, and performance, those major systems and services that the government needs, all starts with an excellent requirements package. I've seen acquisitions that have not gone so well just because of not well written requirements packages. And during this stage with the RFI, we get feedback from industry and look at industry as partners. And that feedback, particularly to the requirements package, is critical in getting, a formal solicitation out there that has a well-written requirements package that we can get, well-developed proposals from industry contractors, and then, have a reasonable assurance and the post, a source selection process that we will have successful mission outcomes.
Yeah. Jennifer, just to piggyback on something that Spenser said about having that industry communication, at what point is it most important for the government to have the dialogue with industry? And at what point is the dialogue less helpful?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So, I've always found it really helpful to get feedback from industry, like when the government posts draft RFPs or draft RFQs, and sort of getting the information at that point, because it's not such a formal process at that point. We don't have to do formal Q&A and amendments to solicitations and all of that stuff. And I found it very useful that if vendors provide feedback, to sort of meet with them, understand their perspectives, and, have even updated requirements and solicitations as a result of that. So I think that that's, to me, one of the best times to receive feedback from industry. So I always encourage our requirements officials, and even if I'm the requirements official sometime, to push for draft RFPs and building that into your schedule and into your process. The time it's least helpful to get the feedback is during the Q&A, actually, when the solicitation goes out, because at that point, it requires formal amendments. You have to extend timelines. It kind of sometimes can put, mission and other requirements at risk. And so you really want to try to get it right the first time it goes out and minimize questions on the back end. So I always say, try to take the time up front. So that's sort of my take on it. Not sure if others from the government.
Like you're a fan of communication all the way right up until that solicitation is released. And at that point, that's when it becomes less effective. Communication gets less effective at that point.
I think so. I mean, obviously, we will accept questions and all of that stuff. But I think at that point, once the solicitation is out, there's a lot more rules that kick in from a regulatory perspective. And so it kind of governs how the government has to deal with questions and discussions from industry, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. So we've heard from the government kind of from the RFI stage and the requirements gathering stage up until solicitation drops, what they're focused on. I'd like to hear from someone from the industry side on between that submission of an RFI and the formal RFP release. And what is your process? What actions are you taking in the background? Karim, would you mind taking that one for us?
Yeah, initially we're freaking out and our hair is on fire. We're putting our capture plan together. We're assigning a capture manager. That individual is leading the opportunity or the pursuit. They're developing the initial presentation to leadership, which is industry's really first gate to present the opportunity and present the business case for pursuing it. That the deal is worth pursuing, and we assign what we call a P-win or probability of win to each deal. And the idea from our side is that as the deal matures, our P-win goes up. And so we're engaging in those activities to up our P-win. We're putting all of the resources to the extent that we can, and they're available together to respond certainly to the RFI, but also to the proposal. That's another key wicket for us in industry, and certainly takes time. We're researching the deal and putting that research together, whether it's on the competition, the incumbent, the scope, the value, clients' objectives, etc. We're putting all of that information together so that it informs our strategy. We're also talking to other companies within industry as potential partners, and that process also takes time. And then lastly, we're talking to government and the client stakeholders, decision makers relative to the deal in question. I guess my point of view on this is to echo Jennifer and others that have just weighed in, that transparency and engagement by government with industry is key. You've already heard about that value from our standpoint. And for you, it creates competition. It levels the playing field by providing all potential offers access to the same level of information. And that information informs our strategy and it informs our proposal. The stronger the proposal, the more value for you. And certainly while competition may result in more proposals for government to evaluate, you certainly derive more value from that competition. Delivery ends up being more effective. And so the taxpayer is benefiting as well. What that engagement and transparency means, you already heard a little bit about it from our standpoint: taking meetings, conducting an industry day, releasing a draft, soliciting feedback on that draft, giving industry time to formulate our plan and proposal. And I guess I'll conclude by saying, when we as industry or companies, not as a group, not just CGI, when we don't see those things or all those things, we question the return on our investment in pursuing a deal, and that may limit competition for a certain solicitation or acquisition, and that's just not the best interest for anybody involved.
So Karim, you were saying that you assign a win probability during this phase, and that that's based on what you saw in the requirements package, also based on what you're able to find on incumbency and things like that. Does your win probability increase or decrease based on informal communication with clients and stakeholders?
Yeah, certainly it informs it. If we find out something, for example, that is germane to a capability, unique or otherwise to our company, and that applies to any company, then we might go back and say, okay, we've got some capabilities, we've got individuals that have delivered those capabilities. We have a stronger story as a result of something we just found out, and that might increase the P-win. Conversely, if we find something out about the incumbent and their delivery and their performance and their relationships and ability to provide a stronger proposal, that might decrease our P-win.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. So now we understand what's going on behind the scenes before something drops. Gissa, would you kind of walk us through your process of seeing something come out formally and what your first steps are in reviewing that solicitation against what you saw in a draft RFP, and how you kind of kick off the solicitation phase?
So if Karim said that your hair was on fire then it's even worse. At this point, you will have about 20 or 30 emails flying around the company, everybody trying to say, did you see the RFP drop? And so the next thing is that usually companies go through the process of shredding the RFP, kind of going through it to see what's the due date, what's being requested, are there any past performance requirements, any key personnel, what's the response structure, especially nowadays with a lot of more innovative techniques in the acquisition process. Sometimes those structures look a little different than they have maybe in the past. What's the page count if there is a written response versus kind of a orals presentation? Eval criteria, what's the pricing? So all of this stuff has to be considered, and we have to go through it. If there was an RFI or a draft PWS that was already released, or what we know of the opportunity and this particular requirements already, did the requirements change? Do we meet all the requirements? We've typically, during the process that Karim mentioned, we've probably kind of thought through a team of, what do we need, any teaming partners? So we have to kind of revisit that to see from a teaming perspective, if the requirements change, do we need to shift our team or add team members or delete team members? And then we have to identify all the internal proposal team, response team, you know, from proposal manager, section leads, proposal writers, pricers. And then we have to go through, after we do all of this, we have to go through an internal bid, no bid approval process. Usually our leadership would want to know, most companies would want to know, okay, what's changed? Has our P1 changed? Do we still, you know, believe that we could put forth a strong response? And through all of that, also come up with a kind of a cost. What's the anticipated BMP cost to the company to basically put forth this response? So a fair number of things that we go through.
Just a couple of hours worth of work, right?
Just a couple of hours worth of work. So that's why, you know, it's like, my goodness, those time frames, it takes you so many days just to cover all of this. So you're just eating into the response time.
Yes. So you mentioned that one of the first steps is to shred the RFQ, and you're looking at the solicitation and trying to make sure it makes sense to you. Oftentimes, I know that leads to questions, things that maybe are unclear, whether it be the structure of the response, the timeline for the response, the actual technical requirements. So as you're coming up with those Q&As, you know, kind of what is the process, Dominic, in submitting Q&As? Is there's, you know, a time that is useful for you? Is our prompt responses going to dictate if you go after a proposal or not? Is there such thing as too late for Q&A responses whenever you receive them, you know, a couple of days before a submission deadline? And can you kind of walk through you know, what sections in the solicitations you typically see the most questions that need to be responded to by the government?
Sure. So first of all, I did not know the term shredding before I started here. And that got me so excited. And it's such a good visualization of the process. To basically tear it apart into its component parts so you can quickly analyze it. I love that. And I love learning all these new terminologies. So on Q&As, I think we think at a minimum around 5 to 7 business days is generally adequate for what we need to do. Anything less than that, we're going to really scramble. As for sections, we generally see the most energy around section L, the instructions, and section M, which the evaluation criteria. Those generally, from our perspective, need the most clarification. And then typically anything that is questions of quantity, so we can figure out how to scale this thing. So, you know, what are we pricing against? How many tickets? How many servers? What are all the requirements? So clarification on that helps us develop what we think the target environment is going to look like in terms of scale. What is too late? You know, we typically will need an extension if the Q&A answers feel like diverge greatly from what we were originally expecting. So then we will really be scrambling. It's too late if the answers come and they're going to blow us out of the water in terms of what our responses were going to look like versus what we now realize we're going to look like. So hopefully when we answer these Q&As, we're not going to get answers that are going to come out of left field. But if we do, it makes it particularly more difficult for us.
Great segue. Jennifer, I want to start with you next. Can you walk us through the process? I mean, Dominic has just submitted his 100 questions to you. What do you do with them all now? How do you determine what you do with the questions and whether he gets an extension if he needs one? Sorry,
yeah, well,
Dominic.
maybe, I think maybe the government shreds as well. We just never called it that. But I think that that's what we do. So, you know, sort of the process is obviously look over all the questions. If the questions are more technical in nature, we do kind of share them with our program partners to help, you know, since they sort of are the requirements owners and that kind of stuff, to help kind of clarify that piece. If they're, you know, procurement process related, then the contracting officer or contract specialist will generally take a stab at that. We work with, you know, finance, budget, legal, sort of the entire IPT, you know, as needed based on the nature of the question. So that's sort of what happens on the government side. I just learned a new term too. Maybe we also shred.
I grew up on the slopes, and so when we were shredding, it was like you got your snowboard out and you hit the ski hill. Different things, right? But Jennifer, how do you determine whether you extend the solicitation or not? What are the kind of different things that might play into, oh, we need to extend here?
Yeah, and certainly would like some feedback from some of my other colleagues in government. But the things that have always sort of kind of raised a flag to me as a contracting officer is, you know, if you get, well, a lot of questions, right? It's volume, because there's only so many people that can answer them. So if you have dozens or hundreds of questions, it's going to take a while to get those responses done, vetted, everybody's on the same page, and get them out in an amendment. So that could drive extending the timeline for proposals. Or, you know, the other thing is if there are questions where usually you'll see a trend if there's something wrong with the requirement. So like, you will see a trend of like multiple vendors asking similar or the same questions. And if you have things like that, where we need to kind of revisit the requirements or maybe the evaluation criteria, some of the big things that Dominic had mentioned, then we will also consider extending the timeline for proposals, because sort of the meat of the solicitation is changing. Did anyone else in government, like maybe I'm missing something big, but those are the two that stand out to me.
Yeah, Jennifer, I agree. And I think I really like the term shredding as well, because you're right. We kind of see the questions that come in and bucket them accordingly, you know, whether they are procurement related or technically related, you know, to better suited for the subject matter experts on the IPT to answer. And based on that, yeah, we consider the quantity of questions received, but also, you know, is it really more clarifications to the solicitation, answering, you know, the procurement process related inquiries, or are these, you know, more questions that are potentially going to point to something that needs to be amended or changed? And if that's the case, that's where, I mean, of course, we would need to figure out the best time frame and listen to industry when it comes to the recommendations for extensions. Especially if requirements are going to be changing or need to be amended.
Patty, I want to toss it over to you next and ask, how often do you think the solicitation Q&A has any bearing on the post-award delivery and performance? Like, do you think that after the Q&A is done, that, okay, all of the vendors are good to go on day one, they're going to be able to start work right away?
We like to think that, of course. We like to think that the Q&As were meaningful and we were able to issue any amendments that really were required to be able to get firm proposals from offerers. So that is always the goal, which is why the timeline for the Q&As and making sure we're getting the right people to answer them if they're programmatic sort of questions is so key. But in reality, that doesn't always happen, especially when we have our very complex IT agile development. Okay, you can have all the Q&As that you want. Doesn't necessarily matter because that's an iterative process. Does that mean that the government necessarily is going to entertain any kind of request for a change, a change order after the fact? No, that's not. We do like to go into this as partners that, yes, the successful offerer understands the requirements. Hopefully all of the appropriate Q&As were answered and we will have a successful outcome, but there's always going to be issues, always post-award, especially in those more complex requirements that are going to arise. And if you have a great partnership, you know, we'll be able to work it out with industry.
Yeah. John, going back to the extensions, if you see that there's a need for an extension, or maybe Dominic has asked you for an extension, how do you determine the length of that extension, and what considerations are you considering for granting that extension or not? Like, is it just volume, or is it the nature of the question as well? Or what if someone is asking for that extension?
So a number of focus areas. One is yeah, I mean, it's better to get it, the solicitation right up front, versus having to, have multiple amendments when the full solicitation comes out. So yeah, a couple of areas, and that was brought up. That Jennifer made a good point. If there are some specific technical requirements areas that most potential offerors have questions about, as a for instance, under agile systems acquisition, software quality assurance, and what and the expectations for initial software quality. So if there's a trend, amongst potential offerors that are focusing in on that, and you're going to have the right subject matter experts on the technical program management side address those. Yeah, so those are potential, what's drivers of time for extensions. And again, I would look at industry as partners. So yeah, if there's a need to give extensions and a reasonable, time frame to that in order to get it right up front, versus issuing a successive number of RFP amendments, better practice to do that up front rather than do it later.
Yeah, let me take a step back and ask: when you release a solicitation, John, how do you determine how long the solicitation is going to be released for?
Well, a market research outcome, certainly. And you want to give offerors, particularly, a reasonable amount of time. Yeah, I'm not one of these people and I worked on both sides of the house, actually, as a, industry acquisition consultant, et cetera. So I'm not one of these people who, okay, let's issue the solicitation before Thanksgiving, and then let's have proposals due, the Monday afterwards. No, I mean,
but why not?
Yeah, no. So, amount of time, again, depends upon the consistency and quality and quantity of, technical SMEs, subject matter experts, and how long it will take them in order to, get clarifications. And, also, all government agencies do have procurement administrative lead time that they try to, adhere to. So that can be included as a factor in the time extensions as well.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. So, Dominic, you have flooded Patricia with 100 questions, and 9 other vendors have done the same. They're in the process
You're
of
welcome.
spreading the. Say what?
I said you're welcome, Patricia.
Yes. And they're in the process of our new term, shredding those questions and getting them to the right people. You're working on the proposal as it's written, and hoping and praying that you get questions and answers in time for you to make any adjustments necessary. You're praying for an extension, but is there a point where you are just full steam ahead, an extension actually doesn't do much for you because you've already gone so far down the path of writing your proposal that it is not beneficial?
So one thing I would say, having been on both sides now, on the government side, if you haven't worked in the industry, if you haven't responded to proposals, we're trying to never let them see us sweat, but we are sweating almost every time. There's never enough time to respond, right? It's always going to be a churn, especially this kind of time of year when you're competing for resources internally. So if we want to err on the side of, if we're going to extend any part of the acquisition process, this one's really important if you want good responses. That said, if I am the incumbent, or if I feel like I'm in a competitive advantage, I'll probably not want to see the extension as much. I might groan a little bit if you're granting an extension. But I don't know if that answers your question, Terrell, but basically, for the most part, extensions, great. We want to see them because we didn't have ever enough time in the first place, unless we got a competitive advantage, in which case We don't need those stinking extensions.
What about an extension of a coding challenge? What do you do then? Because I've heard some different stories on that.
As long as it comes with coffee.
Sorry, no.
So Scott, I have a question for the government that just came in. Is there a process, or is it atypical rather, for the government to receive the questions and answers, understand that it's going to take some time for them to go through those and provide appropriate responses, but recognize that that time is going to impact their ability to get those Q&As back, and it'll be pressing against the submission deadline, and to grant an extension before Q&As are released?
So the question is whether we look at whether the government looks at extending before Q&As are even done.
Correct.
To let people know that, like, we're still working on that.
Yes, sir.
Has anyone done that? Patty or Jennifer or Spencer? John?
So I know for some of our more complex IT procurements, we would build into the acquisition milestone extensions. Okay, time for extensions. And, you know, while you hope you don't need all of that time, that is good to do. But I will say there's a lot of procurements that don't build that in. You might just build in the whole Q&A process, which may be inclusive of the extension, knowing, oh, geez, depending on how many questions I get and how long it takes to answer it, I'm probably going to have to extend it. And then there's also the reality of the timing. If we're getting close to the end of the fiscal year, everybody knows how that goes. If we're not able to give an extension as long as we perhaps would like to, that also plays into it.
I did also see one time where the team was just swamped with so many questions that they extended it just based on the number of questions so that they had time to answer the questions. So that happens sometimes too. I think we're turning into evaluation now, right, Terrell?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So maybe John, you can walk us through, what is that process like? How do you form the technical evaluation board? And what are kind of the responsibilities you look for in each of the members?
So usually there are two teams, obviously, the technical evaluation, and I'm using best value trade-off source selection as the, acquisition strategy here. Two teams, the technical evaluation and the business team as well too. The contracting officer, leading the business team, but the contracting officer plays a very significant role in the technical evaluation team. So if I'm looking to have a savvy, technical evaluation team, I want to look for people who have experience in the particular subject matter areas. Like, for instance, on a agile systems and IT, you want to have somebody who has a significant experience in software development, acquisition, and quality assurance. You don't want to put somebody on the team who was an, aircraft systems engineer. So, having the people with the right requisite technical functional roles, then always good to have experienced people who have done best value trade-off source selections, using the source selection plan as a roadmap. Don't always have that opportunity. Some program offices decide that, well, one of their engineering people, has a lighter workload than the rest of the group, so they get volunteered or voluntold.
Voluntold.
Yeah. So, there it's a matter of the technical team lead and choose that person very wisely. Choose a very, savvy, acquisition savvy person as a team lead, and also who knows the functional, technical subject matters. And, along with the KO to provide the appropriate training and oversight to ensure that the technical evaluation folks are doing so strictly in accordance with the terms of the solicitation, particularly the evaluation criteria in Section M, for protest mitigation and thorough documentation. Document, make sure everybody's being treated fairly.
Yeah. Spenser, I know you work as the portfolio manager, you work really closely with the technical evaluation teams. Can you kind of walk through for people, what does the technical evaluation team do?
Yeah, so no, great question, Scott. And so yeah, each member of the team, one thing we've really been trying to hone in and focus on, to John's point, is before we even get proposals, before we even get quotes, sit down and really go through that section L&M. Learn the evaluation factors and criteria like the back of your hand. Make sure there's clear understanding amongst the TT membership, so that we're not, going in and taking notes and evaluating on things that are not germane to how we told industry we were going to evaluate. So that's the big one. Sitting down, taking the time up front with legal counsel, the contracting officer, and the evaluation team to make sure that there is that clear understanding from the onset is critical. One thing that we have been employing here, or increasingly over the past couple of years, is use of different innovative techniques, such as on-the-spot consensus, where right after we receive the proposals or quotes, or right after we have the oral presentations, the team gets together immediately following, and we immediately start going through what the findings were to reach consensus. That's helped really streamline the time frame associated with documenting evaluation findings, with and really getting to that final consensus document. It streamlines the process tremendously on our side, which I think is a benefit for industry in a way too, because the sooner we can finish up our documentation and get to the award decision, the sooner who gets the award. So that's a little bit of what we've been doing, Scott.
And then Patty, maybe you can talk a little bit about how is that consensus report developed? Like what goes into that, both in like how they come to consensus, and then what goes into the report and what happens to that report?
Sure. So as Spenser mentioned, the consensus report is based on all the evaluations of the evaluators. We have found it super beneficial to go straight to consensus if we can, if we've had an evaluation methodology when we're having actual oral presentations, that lends itself to that, where you're kind of, eliminating that individual step and then having the whole group come together to talk about all the factors. I mean, clearly, we want to make sure that all of the evaluation factors were addressed, that all the team members agreed on what perhaps the strengths are, the weaknesses, any areas potentially later on for clarification or discussions, if discussions are going to occur, in a Part 15 by. All of those things are critically important, making sure that the assumptions are looked at in the proposals. That needs to be addressed as well. So those are all important things around the consensus report.
All right. And then Jennifer, what do you find is most useful in a proposal, and what do you find is least useful in a proposal?
Yeah. So I've always really actually enjoyed reading proposals that highlight sort of key points, like things that make stuff jump out and it's like catches your eye. 'Cause sometimes those proposals are really long and wordy. And I know part of that is the government's fault because of our page limits, but especially when offers are doing a lot of essentially like, marketing materials that don't really add a lot of value to the proposal, kind of being able to get through that to actually understand how they can add value and meet our requirements, and also maybe exceed our requirements, those sort of things that make it easy to evaluate and understand the approach. So those have always been helpful. Like I really like tables and things that make it easy to understand and, grasp what they are, what they're saying in the written format of the proposal as well.
And just for everybody, is there any kind of tip you'd say for industry to help make a proposal better? Jennifer, you can start.
Follow.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, things that help us that stand out. I don't know if it's, it could be a multitude of things, tables, charts. I've seen little boxes that kind of highlight key points in the proposal that kind of call out certain things in the proposal that really get to the heart of the requirements and how they may add additional value beyond just sort of the minimum requirements of the proposal. Others, I'm not sure.
Oh, I totally agree. I was just going to say, just making sure it follows specifically to the instructions and the evaluation criteria. That's what is really good for contracting personnel to see, to really be able to match those two things up from the proposal to what we asked for, and to have the organization in the proposal of what we asked for. And that is assuming the government asked for something that was clear, of course. Hopefully we are asking things that are clear in the instructions and that the evaluation criteria make sense. And if they don't, that's when we always encourage, hey, during the Q&A, please let us know that. So, and then some of the things, and this is just on a personal note, that we didn't like to see necessarily, I mean, especially since a lot of times we have these page limitations. Sometimes we'll see marketing material and you'll see a lot of instructions. Hey, we don't necessarily want to see your marketing material. We would have already seen that during market research. So really just addressing the meat of the solicitation is what we like to see.
Staying with you, Patty, what does the government do with assumptions? Oh, go ahead, Don. Did you want to add something real fast?
Yeah, compliance matrices. So, at a minimum, show that each industry offeror understands and meets all the requirements, both business and technical. And then beyond that, to show, where they exceed. But yeah, those compliance matrices, they get looked at by the contracting officer as well as the technical evaluators.
Yeah. Spenser, you got a favorite?
Pardon?
Do you have a favorite for something that they can do to make their evaluation easier to read?
Oh, I'm leaning towards just the specific callouts and highlights to where the proposal is reducing risk or going above and beyond. I think that's helpful. Anytime we see where it's really just a recapturing of the government's requirement, that's kind of not what we're looking for. We're not looking for like a regurgitation of what the requirement is. We're looking for like what is the value add, what's the risk reduction. So being able to say, yes, we are going to meet this requirement, but giving the little extra kind of highlight to Jennifer's point, I think really goes a long way.
And so Patty, going back to the other question, what does the government do with assumptions?
So what we do is, depending on if they're technical in nature or pricing, because we see assumptions in both. We see them in the price proposal sometimes, and we see them in the technical, get them to the appropriate people to evaluate. As a contract specialist, I always emphasize to technical folks, and then myself doing price analysis, hey, how is this really going to affect the evaluation score? Because those assumptions they very well could affect the score that the offer is going to get, depending on if it looks like that assumption means they may not meet a requirement. And I know that sometimes industry is perhaps reluctant to include an assumption, but at the same time, I understand that they're important for those. So we evaluate them. If it looks like it's going to require further discussions with a particular offer, we may open discussions if that's the case to discuss it. If it's something that we think can be, we can easily dispose of, have an easy disposition for it, we may do that. It's always documented, though. It's always documented on those assumptions, but they are important. I remember first, early on in government, my career anyway, sometimes those assumptions, they weren't necessarily provided to the technical folks. And then going back to your last question, then at time of award, you've got a real problem. So assumptions are very important.
Yeah. Spenser, we'll move on from evaluation. We've evaluated, it's been through all the review. We're now awarded. What's that timeline like for providing a notice to the successful and the unsuccessful offers and getting them either their brief explanation or their debrief?
Yeah, so I mean, really, that's going to depend on the part of the FAR we're following. I mean, and Patty, maybe you could help me out with this related to FAR 15. It's pretty straightforward as far as like the amount of time we have to notify of the awards are unsuccessful.
Yep. So if we're doing FAR 15, and I think it is important for industry to understand what parts of the FAR government is using. Part 8 is different from Part 16, for example. Part 15 is very formal source selection, so there are very specific regulations in Part 15. So just taking that, for example, we have to notify all unsuccessful offers 3 days after the award. And some of the things that unsuccessful offers would see in there is the number of companies solicited, number of proposals that were received. So there's a whole list of things in FAR 15 that outline what those unsuccessful offer letters would see. And then, of course, it is the right, obviously, and our duty as government to debrief offers and provide information about their proposal, not necessarily, of course, we can't disclose any other offer's proposal, including the awardee. We can, obviously, we're disclosing, you're going to know the awardee's name, you're going to know that in the unsuccessful offer letter. But to the extent that we can go through your proposal during the debriefing process and explain why you got those technical rankings, that is super important because it just improves the whole integrity of the process and hopefully make industry understand, why we did the ratings that we did.
And John, staying on that topic, what sort of information do you include in your debriefings or your explanations? And do you typically hold conversations with them, or is it just writing?
So can do it a number of ways. Yeah, I mean, it's done both. A lot of contracting officers do it via email. Depending upon the complexity and the size and, the potential protest risk, which always look to, for mitigation, good to having it in person and bringing the team together. So what you don't want to do is do technically leveling, meaning giving, another offeror's proprietary information away doing those. But at a minimum, you may want to give them, information as to where the company, either best value trade-off, maybe minimally met the requirement, whereas, the winning offeror, had a much better solution, or areas where, the company could do better. At one, where, and this was for at Agile Systems acquisition, and yeah, they, the whole team, the company brought in the team, and of course there were outside legal staff as well too, so they were, ready for this one. But, we, program manager, technical team lead, our counsel, and contracting officer and us, we went through and gave them the facts as to, where there were some, substantive technical deficiencies. So they took that in account. Actually another best value trade-off source selection, later on during that fiscal year. So, it's about, communicating the requisite information, who won, and then, and then other facts where, the offer was deficient in technical areas. But again, you don't want to give away the winning offerors, proprietary information, do technical leveling.
Yeah. And Jennifer, I know that you're over there in the Office of Policy and all those other words that would make the big long title you mentioned. What are things that you say do not belong in a debrief, whether that's in writing or at the oral?
Yeah. So the FAR kind of goes over the basics, right? Like it tells you things that you can and cannot talk about in a debrief. And so the government really does try to comply with that stuff because we don't want to, provide trade secrets or proprietary information from other offerers. We also won't get into a lot of details about other offers. We try to stick to providing feedback to the vendor that we are speaking with on the merits of their proposal. Obviously we will provide certain elements about a successful proposal, but beyond that, we can't really get into their technical approach. Some of that could be proprietary. Obviously also, the weeds and details of their pricing structures and that kind of stuff. So those are the sorts of things we can't talk about during debriefings.
What's your favorite question to be asked at a debrief, and which one's the one that sets your hair on fire, Jennifer?
I've been out of operations for a little while. Does anybody that's been in operations? That's a great question, and I'd have to take a little time to think about it. But I'm not sure. Does anyone else who's been in operations a little bit more recently want to take a stab at that one?
Well, it hasn't been super recent, but one of the questions that kind of puts our hair on fire is, tell us how that successful offerer can actually do that, because we know for a fact they can't. That's another question that I want to hear.
Yeah.
And I have heard that before.
And then it gets into like, how do you respond to that? Like, how do you know that? And,
All right,
we're
thanks.
going to talk about your.
That's funny. I know, having been a contracting officer, I received that exact same question, and my response was, yeah, how do you know? Were you in there? Did you see their proposal? How are you aware of that? Yes. So Gissa, from the industry perspective, whenever you are sitting or reading a debrief, what information do you find most valuable?
Honestly, it just comes to just being able to understand how we fared for each evaluation criteria. So we would just love to understand, what were our weaknesses and what were the areas that were our strengths. It helps us to just kind of have an understanding what we should continue doing and what we should stop doing for future responses. If we lost, completely understand, we can't know exactly, what was the response of the awardee, but at minimum, an understanding of where we landed on the ratings versus the awardee. If we got a moderate, they got an exceptional on the technical response, or the management section, or something like that. Also, to know the awardee's price is helpful, just so we know where we landed. I know it's becoming more and more prevalent where the price is sometimes noted. Typically we all find that information out after award in FPDS. Once it gets posted to FPDS, but it's helpful to know that along with the debrief, to know where you landed from a price perspective. And then lastly, we always appreciate, you asked about in-person conversations, and we always appreciate in-person conversations with our federal partners, because it just, the written back and forth of just going back and forth takes more time than sometimes just getting on a call to talk through some of the challenges or the discrepancies that we may have seen. And nowadays, you can have virtual calls versus in-person calls, so that it can, kind of save the government some time, but that is always helpful as well.
Awesome. So Dominic, how do you take the information in a debrief and apply it to future solicitations?
So first of all, this is another expression of appreciation for the COs who provide full value-added debriefs. I'm guessing it's something like having to clean up after Christmas morning. You got your award in place, you think you're done, and no, now they need feedback. I'm gonna hear complaints. So I get it, and I understand why that may be a task that feels drudgerous. I say that because it is so important to us. And so I went through these questions with our capture manager, and words like greatly appreciated. And, we cannot understate enough how much value these briefings give us in preparing for the next opportunity. So, we take the debriefs, take all the information we get, and yes, we'd rather do in person, and obviously, but we'll take whatever we can get, any communication back, and we actually do a retrospective, and we talk to the team. We talk about, we shred the thing to figure out what we did well and what we didn't, and we really put that feedback. You're just getting better competition. You're going to get better responses next time around. So please keep doing it. Thank you for all the effort that goes into it, because we really, really do value it.
Awesome. Thank you, Dominic. So Karim, based on the response from the notices, the unsuccessful offer notices, what information would you pull from that and make a business decision if you think that you really have the best proposal on lodging a protest?
Yeah, and it's a really tricky decision to make, and certainly emotion plays into it, because companies have vested a lot of time, energy, and money into the proposals we develop, and sometimes, maybe just sometimes, we take it personally when we're not successful. So there's always emotion that plays into it, but there are enough individuals that go into deciding whether or not to protest that emotion eventually comes out of the decision-making calculus. So I'm going to answer directly, and I'd like to propose something not relative to protest, but in general to this body. We consider all the information that we received. And if we don't receive any information in the way of a debrief, then we make assumptions. And there's certainly, in that case, there's a risk that those assumptions can be erroneous. If they're erroneous and we move forward with a protest, this is hypothetically speaking, it costs us money and it costs the government time and money. We try to ascertain as best as we possibly can if there are merits to a protest, in conjunction with our leaders, in conjunction with inside and outside counsel. We look at and determine if there were flaws. Maybe they're perceived, maybe not, in the evaluation process. We determine if there was an unequal evaluation across the offers. We try to determine if there was bias, etc. Anything that could provide merit to a protest, we try to determine if that was the case and if we should move forward. We also weigh the cost against the potential outcome. What's the likelihood that a different outcome will occur? And so we debate that. What's the likelihood that a different outcome occurs and that our company being awarded the contract is in that scenario? So there could be a different outcome, but the outcome might not benefit our company. So we debate that. And we also consider reputational risk. Is there a risk to our company's reputation if we protest? And we discuss and debate. We all know that there's a certain window for protesting, but we discuss and we debate, and we discuss and we debate, and eventually we decide whether or not to move forward. So those are the things that go on industry side after being notified of being unsuccessful relative to protests. Okay, so that's that. Here's what I'd like to propose. As we prepared for this as a group, and Terrell, I've still got a couple minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
As we prepared as a group, this is me personally, but as we prepared over the last few weeks, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, the momentum around AI, the buzz around AI, and we wake up to it every morning with industry publications and the news, has become mainstream. And so as I prepared for this panel today, I thought, is there a place in this body, not on this panel to discuss, but in this very powerful public-private partnership on this topic for AI? And given where we are, I propose that we consider establishing a working group to explore the merits and practicality of incorporating AI into a proposal evaluation. And I'm not suggesting eliminating the human element to this. I know that could never happen. But if we do it right, if it's secure, if it's accurate, if it's auditable, then I think we can create a model and some governance guardrails that reduces the burden on government, so the personnel can focus more on programs and mission. We can increase the evaluation velocity potentially. We can potentially increase accuracy and automatically generate evaluation narratives potentially even consensus. In a closed loop environment, I believe that these things are now possible, and we can pilot low-hanging fruit like corporate experience or CPARs or resumes. We can work with academia potentially, or a neutral third-party body for development of the logic and the code, and that can be validated by government potentially. And those are details we can figure out later, but I got really excited about the potential for us to explore it as a group. And I think that we should partner and we should get ahead of it. And we should continue to discuss its merits. So with that very provocative suggestion and proposal, I thank you all for the opportunity, and I'll cede the floor.
Great suggestion, Karim. I love it. Well, I'm going to wrap up here, and then maybe we'll have time for other questions. I know we've got one in the chat. And this is the one kind of open for everyone on the government side. We've kind of heard anecdotally that there's a prejudice or a reputational risk if you receive a protest from a vendor. And so I'd like to know, what do you think from a government perspective if you do receive that protest of your award? Patty, you want to start us off?
Sure. From my perspective, and this is the way I always thought, I never took it necessarily personally. Are you disappointed you receive a protest after you do all that work? Absolutely. Does it cost money? Obviously on the industry's part, but also the government's part when we have to stop work and then work on the protest. It does, but that is, we are spending government dollars. That is the right of offerers if they believe something is not done appropriately. This is why we actually believe debriefings are so critical, because if we have that transparency that we were talking about here, and we explain why things were rated the way they were and why there was a best value done and the successful offer got it, if we do that, hopefully there would be less protest that we would receive. That's just my perspective. I know I've gotten that question before. Hey, if we protest this, or if we are protesting all of these task orders, for example, if they're over a certain dollar threshold and you're doing Part 16 and it's a multiple order, are the technical people, are they going to feel like, oh, they're not going to evaluate us fairly? No, we can't do that. We have to evaluate every procurement on its own. And the contracting officer is responsible for making sure that happens too. And oftentimes we have different tech evaluators anyway, depending on the procurement. So, but again, that's just my take. Others in government might have another, different feeling.
Yeah, Jennifer, John, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would have to chime in with Patricia. At least in, groups I've managed and acquisitions I've led as a contracting officer, I don't take it personally. It is what it is. And, look to the team to, have both technical and business in order to make sure things are documented thoroughly in accordance with the evaluation criteria in Section M and the instructions in L, et cetera. Most GAO protests these days, about 60% of them are overturned the award is because of lack of sufficient documentation in accordance with the Section M and the and other parts of the proposal and the technical and business evaluation team. So again, I would. It happens. Don't take it personally. It's a lot of work and time and money for both government and industry. And in those cases where it wasn't documented, then I'm always a big person that I tell people to document, and make sure it's thoroughly and consistently done across all evaluation criteria and the the requirements of the solicitation. So, again, in those cases where, there may be a protest, the GA may, have overturned it. I haven't had one personally, but you know, I know others who you know, who have had. You know, it's an opportunity for people to learn and for the future. But again, it's, you know, if you do it right up front, you know, it's a win-win for both government and industry doing the evaluation up front correctly.
Let me flip it around on you, Jennifer, and ask, have you ever heard someone say, oh yeah, that company protests everything?
No, you know, no, not really. I mean, there are vendors that I have an understanding. Sometimes they typically do protest if they don't win. But again, like John and Patty said, I don't think that we in the government take that personally. We shouldn't if we do. As Patty mentioned, we're spending taxpayers' dollars, which is all of our money. And there's a reason why there are very specific processes in the government, because we want to be very thoughtful. We want to be fair. We want to make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. And so maybe I've heard people say, yes, this vendor protests a lot, but it's not in the vein of like they protest and so we'll never award to them, because if they have a good proposal, they can win an award. It just depends on you know, a lot of factors and getting that proposal right, which is, to Patty's point, some of the things we've talked about, you know, making sure that we do the work up front, that the requirements are good, that the evaluation criteria makes sense, and it's what we actually care about and what we, you know, want to evaluate for. Making sure that we're providing useful debriefings to vendors, highlighting what they are weak on, because if we can actually show, you know, this is something that your proposal was pretty weak on, it didn't hit these marks for these reasons, most reasonable people will say, okay, that, you know, that makes sense. We messed it up right there, you know? So yeah, hopefully that.
Great. Thanks. So Cheryl, do we have any questions out in the chat that are unanswered?
So I did see one question, and I think that it would be difficult to speak for all of the agencies, but have any of y'all on the government side done an analysis of the likelihood of a protest if you do in-person versus written notifications of unsuccessful offers?
We've never, as far as I know, we haven't done any sort of like detailed analysis of that. And in my current position or in previous positions, I'm not sure about others.
Seems like an interesting question. I don't know.
I know at the Pill we do post-award interviews. Anytime a team uses innovations and they go through the Pill process, we interview vendors afterwards to find out what was the impact of those innovations and were they effective or not. And we have heard back that oral presentations are really appreciated, and that I have definitely heard at least one time, hey, I was going into the oral presentation thinking I was going to protest. And when I came out of that oral debrief, I had a lot better understanding and I did not have any concerns to protest. So we have heard that, not quite anecdotally, but something in between anecdotally and a study.
Awesome. Thank you. So there's one more question. We just have a couple of minutes, but Karen asked, we've discussed a lot of questions are often around L and M. While it seems including these sections in a draft solicitation can minimize this, it doesn't happen very often. How does the government determine whether to include these sections in advance of the final solicitation? So evaluation, draft evaluation factors in a draft RFP. Spenser, do you have any ideas on how that determination is made, if it's useful to include draft evaluation factors in a draft RFP?
Yeah, I mean, if my understanding, at least from my experience, if we're moving out with a draft RFP, we're going to include the evaluation factors and criteria. Are we saying that sometimes that those portions are left blank or left with like TBD at this time?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess that would also depend on what the government is planning to evaluate. Like if they are trying to make it to where it, Scott, I'm thinking back to a technical challenge, like where they may want to hold that specific piece of information so that, you know, all of industry only has a certain amount of time to see that technical challenge, digest it, and develop a solution. So it may be done on purpose for cases like that. Otherwise, it may be that simply they're still working to hone in on what the factors are. Otherwise, I mean, in a lot of the draft RFPs I've seen and had experience with, we try and go out with everything. So like going back to the beginning of the discussion, we can get that feedback before we enter into that formal Q&A back and forth. So that maybe some thoughts behind there. But Scott, I don't know if there's other situations like the technical solutions where you've seen it be blank.
I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of times I've seen it where they just don't have that ready yet. And so they're like really early in the process. Anytime we're coaching a team, we say, release the whole thing, even if it is just a draft, and let people know. One of the big things we're coaching now is letting industry know, hey, this is going to come out in the really short term, in the near term, or hey, I'm just doing this for information. That way y'all know where it's at. And so we're trying to get more and more teams to do that. But yeah.
Awesome. So I know that there were some more questions. We're running out of time, but what we'll try to do is incorporate these questions into our best practices document. I want to let Nicole take over and just wrap us up today. But before I pass the mic, I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a very engaging conversation, and there's a lot that I've taken personally out of it from getting to hear both industry and government's best practices. So thank you. Thank you. Nicole.
And that's really all I have to say too, Terrell. Thank you, Terrell and Scott, for facilitating today. Thank you to our panelists for your acquisition wisdom this afternoon, and our attendees as well. Thank you for your time and for strengthening the relationship between government and industry. We look forward to working with everybody here moving forward. If you'd like to contribute to our white paper that we're going to develop about some of the topics we touched on today, please reach out to the acquisition COI@gmail.com.
Any final thoughts, Scott?
No, really great conversation. I learned a lot about shredding and everything else that industry talked about today.
I'm coining the term, and every time you say it, I'm going to get some revenue from that.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, moderators. Thank you, Scott, for facilitating the discussion, and have an outstanding week.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.